She did not ask how many hours I worked. She did not ask how hard I worked. She just looked at my face, my age, my skin, and decided I did not belong here. She came to my house with a warning, but she never thought to check my papers, and when she did, it was already in court. It is funny how some people think that being young means renting. Have you ever heard someone say that success is all about age? Comment below with your story. My name is Sarah Hamilton, a 23-year-old recent law school graduate working as a paralegal in real estate law. Most people assume I am just another broke young adult, but I am actually the granddaughter of Mayor William Hamilton, who founded Oakwood Estates in 1983. The house at 1247 Maple Lane was not a purchase, it was a legacy passed down through my grandfather's will. After finishing school and navigating probate, I moved in just 3 months ago. Unfortunately, that short time was enough to put me on the radar of Karen Whitmore, our Homeowner Association president for the past 3 years, known for her obsessive rule enforcement and fondness for intimidation. Karen believed someone my age had no business owning such a home. Married to a well-connected bank manager, she often leveraged her husband's influence to pressure residents. From the moment I arrived, she began quietly building a case against me, convinced that I was hiding something simply because I did not fit her idea of who belonged in Oakwood Estates. The trouble started small, the way these things always do. Karen began what she called investigating me, which really meant showing up at my door every other day asking intrusive questions about the real homeowner. She would stand on my porch with her clipboard and her fake smile, asking things like, when will your parents be visiting, and does the actual owner know you are living here? I tried to be polite at first, explaining that I was the legal owner, but Karen would just shake her head and say, "Honey, a girl your age does not just stumble into a house like this." By the second week, Karen had escalated to taking photos. I would come home from work to find her in my driveway snapping pictures of my car, my mailbox, even my garbage cans. When I asked what she was doing, she would claim she was documenting suspicious activity for her homeowner association reports. She started sending emails to the entire neighborhood about security concerns and unknown individuals living in the community. The emails never mentioned my name directly, but everyone knew she was talking about me. The third week brought the fake violations. I came home to find a bright orange notice taped to my door, claiming my grass was 3.2 inches tall, exceeding the 3-inch maximum. I got out my tape measure and found my grass was exactly 2.5 inches, well within regulations. When I called Karen to dispute it, she told me the measurement was official and I owed a $200 fine. 2 days later another notice appeared, this time claiming I was parking commercial vehicles overnight, referring to my Honda Civic, which apparently looked too business-like for Karen's taste. The worst part was watching my neighbors start to avoid me. Karen had been spreading rumors that I was some kind of con artist or drug dealer, explaining how else could someone so young afford such an expensive house. People who used to wave when I walked my dog suddenly found reasons to go inside when they saw me coming. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, actually crossed the street to avoid walking past my house during her evening stroll. By the 4th week, Karen had convinced herself she was some kind of detective. She started leaving voicemails on my phone, demanding I provide proof of legitimate income and threatening to expose my fraudulent activity to the authorities. She told me she was going to hire a private investigator to get to the bottom of this situation, and then she would not rest until the truth came out. The final straw came when she called the police, claiming I was trespassing on private property and demanding they remove the squatter from my own home. Officer Martinez arrived at my door on a Tuesday evening, looking embarrassed and apologetic. "Madam, we received a call about a possible trespassing situation. I know this is probably a misunderstanding, but I am required to follow up on all reports." Karen stood on the sidewalk behind him, arms crossed and wearing a satisfied smirk, like she just solved the crime of the century. "Officer, this young woman has been illegally occupying this property for months. I demand you arrest her for breaking and entering." I invited Officer Martinez inside and calmly showed him my property deed, my driver's license, and my homeowner's insurance paperwork. He looked over everything carefully, while Karen paced outside, occasionally shouting through the window about forged documents and elaborate fraud schemes. Officer Martinez handed my papers back and shook his head. "Madam, your documentation is perfectly legitimate. I am going to have a word with the complainant about filing false police reports." As he walked toward Karen, I heard him say, "Mrs. Whitmore, this is the third false report you have filed this month. If you continue this harassment, you could face charges yourself." That night, as I watched Karen stomp back to her house while muttering about corrupt police and conspiracy, I made a decision. She wanted to know who I really was. She wanted to play detective and dig into my background, fine, but two could play that game, and unlike Karen, I actually knew what I was doing. I called my father that evening and explained the situation. Judge Hamilton listened quietly, then said something that made me smile. "Sarah, your grandfather always said that bullies only understand one language. Maybe it is time this woman learned some vocabulary." The next morning I started my own investigation. Thanks to my legal training and my grandfather's history with the community, I had access to homeowner association records dating back to the neighborhood's founding. What I found was fascinating and damning. Karen had been systematically abusing her position as homeowner association president, selectively enforcing rules against people she did not like while ignoring identical violations by her friends and allies. She had been changing homeowner association regulations without proper voting procedures, using community funds for personal legal expenses, and creating entirely fictional rules to justify her harassment campaigns. I discovered that Karen's own property had multiple violations that she had simply ignored. Her fence exceeded the height limit by 6 inches, she had been parking her husband's work van overnight in violation of commercial vehicle restrictions, and she was keeping 4 dogs when the homeowner association limit was 2. Most importantly, I found records showing that Karen had used over $3,000 in homeowner association funds to hire a lawyer for what she called investigating property fraud, basically paying someone to help her harass me. My breakthrough came when I contacted Mrs. Thompson, a 75-year-old woman who had lived in the neighborhood since my grandfather's time. When I introduced myself as William Hamilton's granddaughter, her entire demeanor changed. "Oh my goodness, you are Bill's granddaughter. He was the finest man who ever lived in this neighborhood. He will be so proud to see you carrying on his legacy." Mrs. Thompson had stories, lots of them. Stories about how Karen had tried to have her evicted for excessive cat ownership even though she only had 1 cat, stories about fake violations and intimidation tactics, and neighbors who had been driven out by Karen's harassment. But Mrs. Thompson also gave me something else, allies. She had been quietly documenting Karen's behavior for years, waiting for someone who could actually do something about it. She introduced me to Mr. Rodriguez, the neighborhood handyman who had witnessed Karen destroying my flower beds while I was at work. She connected me with Linda Park, a single mother who had been too afraid to speak up when Karen tried to fine her for inappropriate lawn decorations, a children's sandbox. Was building a coalition of neighbors who had been victims of Karen's abuse of power. The final piece of my strategy involved something Karen had never expected. I reached out to the County Homeowner Association Oversight Board. It turned out that Oakwood Estates had been operating under outdated bylaws that gave Karen far more power than she was legally entitled to. The Oversight Board was very interested to learn about unauthorized rule changes, misuse of community funds, and systematic harassment of residents. They scheduled a formal review for the following month's homeowner association meeting, a review that would require Karen to justify every decision she had made as president. The monthly homeowner association meeting was usually attended by maybe 15 residents out of 50 households. This time 42 people showed up. Karen walked into the community center conference room expecting her usual audience of board retirees and a few concerned parents. Instead, she found nearly the entire neighborhood waiting for her, including several faces she probably had not seen at a meeting in years. She looked confused but pleased, assuming people were finally taking community governance seriously. "Good evening, everyone," Karen began, settling into her usual spot at the head table. "I am delighted to see such engagement from our community. As you know, we have some serious security concerns to address tonight." She pulled out a thick folder and smiled in my direction. "I have been conducting a thorough investigation into fraudulent property ownership in our neighborhood, and I believe we have a responsibility to protect our community from criminal elements." I sat quietly in the back row, wearing my best professional attire and carrying a briefcase that had belonged to my grandfather. Karen spent 20 minutes presenting her evidence against me, including photos of my car, copies of my property deed which she claimed were forgeries, and a detailed timeline of my suspicious activities, which apparently included things like receiving mail and maintaining landscaping. She concluded her presentation by demanding that the Homeowner Association contact law enforcement and initiate proceedings to remove this individual from our community. The room was silent when Karen finished. Then Mrs. Thompson stood up slowly, using her cane for support. "Karen dear, I think it is time you learned something about the young woman you have been harassing. Sarah, would you please come forward?" I walked to the front of the room, opened my briefcase, and pulled out a framed photograph from 1983, the groundbreaking ceremony for Oakwood Estates featuring my grandfather cutting the ribbon while the mayor and city council looked on. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the suddenly attentive room. "I would like you to meet my grandfather, William Hamilton, the man who purchased this land, designed this neighborhood, and established the Oakwood Estates Homeowner Association with the express purpose of protecting residents' rights, not violating them." I looked directly at Karen, whose face had gone completely white. "My name is Sarah Hamilton. I graduated from Northwestern Law School 3 months ago, and the house at 1247 Maple Lane has been in my family since the day this neighborhood was built. I placed my grandfather's original property deed on the table, the master deed that covered the entire development. This document shows that my grandfather not only owned my current house but actually owned all the land that became Oakwood Estates. He sold individual lots to families who wanted to build their dream homes, and he kept detailed records of every transaction to ensure this community would thrive for generations." I pulled out a thick folder of documents. These are those records, along with my grandfather's will, the probate court's ruling, and my completely legitimate ownership papers. But I was not finished. "Mrs. Whitmore, you asked for an investigation, so I conducted one. What I found was 3 years of systematic abuse of your position as Homeowner Association president." I opened my laptop and connected it to the room's projector. "These are recordings of our conversations, including your threats and demands for information you had no legal right to request. These are photographs of property damage you caused to my flower beds while I was at work. And these are financial records showing that you have used $3,200 in community funds to pay a lawyer to help you harass me." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Karen tried to interrupt, but I continued. "More importantly, these are records of your own property violations that you have ignored while fabricating violations against me and other residents." The projector showed clear photos of Karen's oversized fence, her husband's commercial vehicle, and her 4 dogs playing in a yard that was supposed to accommodate only 2 pets according to Homeowner Association regulations. Mrs. Thompson stood up again. "I want everyone to know that Sarah is not the first person Karen has targeted. Over the past 3 years, she has harassed 17 different households with fake violations, illegal fines, and intimidation tactics. Some of our neighbors have actually moved away rather than continue dealing with her abuse. Other residents began speaking up, sharing their own stories of Karen's harassment. The tide had turned completely. Mr. Rodriguez raised his hand. "I have a video of Karen destroying Sarah's flowers and then trying to fine her for inadequate landscaping the next day." Linda Park stood up with tears in her eyes. "Karen tried to have my children's sandbox removed, claiming it was a safety hazard, but the real reason was that she did not like children playing outside her window." One by one, Karen's victims were finding their voices. Karen tried desperately to regain control of the situation. "This is ridiculous. I am the president of this association. I have the authority to investigate suspicious activity and enforce community standards." She pointed at me accusingly. "This girl has somehow fooled all of you, but I know fraud when I see it. Someone her age does not just inherit a house worth $800,000. I smiled calmly and pulled out one more document. "Mrs. Whitmore, you are absolutely right that someone my age does not typically inherit such valuable property, but you might be interested to know that my father is Judge Robert Hamilton of the County Superior Court, and he has been very concerned about the harassment his daughter has been experiencing." Karen's face went from white to green. "He is particularly interested in your use of Homeowner Association funds for personal legal expenses, which constitutes embezzlement of community resources. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different, charged with anticipation rather than confusion. I continued. The County Homeowner Association Oversight Board has also been reviewing your actions as president. They have found multiple violations of state regulations governing homeowner associations, including unauthorized rule changes, selective enforcement of regulations, and failure to maintain proper financial records. They will be presenting their findings to the district attorney next week. Mrs. Thompson called for an immediate vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. All in favor of removing Karen Whitmore as president of the Oakwood Estates Homeowner Association, 41 hands went up. Karen looked around the room in shock, finally realizing that her reign of terror was over. This is not legal. You cannot just vote me out. I know my rights. But Mr. Rodriguez was already collecting signatures on a petition to formally dissolve Karen's presidency and call for a new election. The meeting ended with Karen storming out, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits and how we would all be sorry, but her threats rang hollow now that everyone knew the truth. As residents filed out of the community center, dozens of people stopped to shake my hand and apologize for believing Karen's lies. Your grandfather would be so proud, Mrs. Thompson whispered as she hugged me goodbye. He always said this neighborhood would be protected by people who cared about justice. Within a week, Karen and her husband had put their house on the market. The harassment stopped immediately, as did the fake violation notices that had been plaguing half the neighborhood. The for sale sign in front of their house became a symbol of victory for everyone who had suffered under Karen's tyranny. They priced the house 15% below market value, desperate to sell quickly and escape the community that had turned against them. I was unanimously elected as the new Homeowner Association president, despite my initial protests that I was too young and inexperienced. Sarah, Mrs. Thompson said during my swearing-in ceremony, your grandfather built this community on principles of fairness and respect. You have already proven you will fight to protect those principles just like he did. My first official act was to establish a grievance committee that would review all fines and violations to ensure they were legitimate and fairly applied. We also implemented new financial transparency measures, requiring monthly reports on homeowner association expenditures and community approval for any legal expenses. The $3,000 Karen had spent harassing me was recovered through the sale of her house, and we used that money to install new playground equipment that the neighborhood children had been requesting for years. Karen's legacy of fear and intimidation was being replaced by actual community improvement. The most satisfying change was watching my neighbors rediscover their sense of community. People started talking to each other again, organizing block parties and neighborhood barbecues. Children played outside without fear of noise complaints, and residents felt free to decorate their homes for holidays without worrying about fake violations. Mrs. Patterson, who had been avoiding me for months, became one of my strongest supporters and brought me homemade cookies every Sunday. 6 months after Karen's departure, we held the first annual William Hamilton Community Day, featuring a dedication ceremony for the new playground and a historical display about my grandfather's vision for Oakwood Estates. My father, Judge Hamilton, attended as the guest of honor, and his presence sent a clear message to anyone who might consider following in Karen's footsteps. This community was under protect. But perhaps the best outcome was personal. Daniel Rodriguez, Mr. Rodriguez's son, who worked as a landscape architect, had helped design the new community garden we built in the empty lot at the end of Maple Lane. Working together on that project, we discovered we had a lot in common beyond just surviving Karen's harassment. Our first date was a picnic in the garden we had created together, and 6 months later he proposed to me right there among the roses my grandfather had planted 40 years ago. 2 years later, I stood in my front yard watering the same rose bushes that had started this whole adventure. My wedding ring caught the sunlight as I adjusted the hose, and I could not help but smile thinking about how different my life had become. Daniel and I had bought the house next door when old Mr. Peterson moved to Florida, and we were planning to start a family in the neighborhood where my grandfather's legacy lived. The community had thrived under new leadership. Property values had actually increased after Karen left, as word spread about Oakwood Estates being a genuinely welcoming place to live. We had implemented programs for new residents, including welcome committees and mentorship opportunities that helped people integrate into the community instead of being subjected to harassment and suspicion. The contrast with Karen's reign could not have been more stark. I had also started my own law practice specializing in homeowner association disputes and property rights. Word had spread about the young lawyer who had taken down an abusive homeowner association president, and I found myself representing residents from communities across the country who were dealing with their own Karens. Each case reminded me of how important it was to stand up to bullies, regardless of what authority they claimed to possess. Mrs. Thompson, now 87 and still sharp as a tack, had become like a grandmother to me. She often told visitors the story of how little Sarah Hamilton saved our neighborhood from that terrible woman, and she never tired of explaining how my grandfather would have handled the situation exactly the same way. Your grandfather always said that real leadership is not about having power over people, she would remind me, it is about using whatever power you have to protect people who cannot protect themselves. The final vindication came when the county district attorney filed formal charges against Karen for embezzlement and harassment. She ultimately pleaded guilty to misuse of community funds and was sentenced to community service and restitution payments. The legal proceedings made local news, and the story became a cautionary tale about what happens when small-time tyrants abuse their authority. Karen had tried to destroy my life because she could not believe someone my age deserved what I had earned. Instead, she destroyed her own life and lost everything she had tried so hard to protect. As I finished watering my roses and looked around at the thriving community my grandfather had built, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lesson Karen had inadvertently taught me. She had shown me that standing up to bullies is not just about defending yourself, it is about protecting everyone who comes after you. Every person who moves into Oakwood Estates now knows they will be welcomed and supported, not harassed and intimidated. That is a legacy worth fighting for, and it is one my grandfather would definitely approve of. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well, building something better, and making sure the bullies of the world learn that their tactics do not work on people who know their worth and will not back down from a fight. Funny.